السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. اليوم محاضرتنا سلسلة جديدة من محاضرات Respiratory System Physiology. إن شاء الله اليوم نبدأ بالمحاضرة الأولى. أنا تعمدت أخلي Respiratory System هو آخر شيء، لأن أكو شغلات بالريسبيراتوري سيستم نحتاج إنه نفهم الرينال، نحتاج نفهم الجي اي تي على مود سهولة فهم الريسبيراتوري سيستم. الريسبيراتوري سيستم بالحقيقة هو يعني it is of two parts: upper respiratory system and lower respiratory system. لكن بسبب الوضع الحالي وحاولنا نختصر المحاضرات بصورة شديدة، اضطرينا انه نلغي الابر respiratory system اللي هو النوز واللارنكس والساينسز، ونخليه هذا الموضوع بمراحل متقدمة ان شاء الله بالسنوات المقبلة. ولهذا lower respiratory system راح يكون تركيزنا على lower respiratory system. lower respiratory system start from the trachea, bronchi and two lung. There are two lung, right and left. There are difference in size of the lung because of the presence of the heart. Heart presence on the left, so the left lung is smaller and only two lobes, while the right is of three lobes. The circulation of the blood supply of the lung is also differ from other part of the blood supply of other organ in the body. It's also have two blood supply: oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood. Oxygenated blood supply the organ of the conducting system. Respiratory system consisting of conducting zone and respiratory zone. Conducting zone only conduct or reach the air to the alveoli, while respiratory zone where the gas exchange occur. So the conducting zone or conducting part of the respiratory system is like other organ, receive oxygenated blood from arteries which have high oxygen, while the area of the gas exchange receive low oxygenated blood or deoxygenated blood, because the function of the lung is the oxygenation, is the gas exchange. So it is receive deoxygenated blood from the pulmonary artery. Physiology of the ventilation, the lung and the breathing. There are two lung and the breathing is either نقدر نعرف هاي السلايد. This is the trachea and then two bronchi, trachea and bronchi surrounded by the C-shaped cartilage. This C-shaped cartilage prevent the collapse of the trachea. This C-shaped cartilage change in shape to cartilage plate in smaller bronchiole. Then after that the cartilage is disappear, and when reaching the bronchioles and terminal bronchioles there is no cartilage until reaching to the alveoli, where there is no muscle and no cartilage, only one layer of the epithelial cell surround the air in the gas exchange area. In this picture we can see the two lung, trachea, two bronchi, two lung, and this area is enlarged to see more details. This is the air inside the alveoli, and the air can be exchanged with the blood vessels surround each alveolus. The blood supply is very rich, and there is difference in the blood supply of different part or different zone of the lung. We'll discuss in the next lecture. Lung volume is about weight of the lung is about 1 kilogram. It is 50% blood and 50% other tissue. The gas exchange area comprise about we can reach to this gas exchange area about 10 level of branching, but ideally after 16 level. Multiple branching till reaching the gas exchange area. The physiology of the breathing, the breathing is of two cycle or two stage: inspiration or expiration. This process is depend on the pressure. When the volume of the lung is increased, so decreasing the pressure inside the lung, this will push the air inside the lung. And in expiration العكس راح يصير, pressure increase inside the lung that will push the air to the external. So the expiration and inspiration and expiration is depend of the muscle. The muscle is in the thoracic cage, is there between the rib, diaphragm, and the external surface of the lung, and the internal surface of the thoracic cage. In between these two surfaces there is pleural fluid and pleura. This pleural fluid help like adhesive the lung to the inside of the thoracic cage. So with the movement of the thoracic cage, with the movement of the muscle that act on the ribs, the lung will inflate and deflate accordingly. So when there is two this is in this process, in this picture we can see this is the two bronchus, right and left, and surrounded by blood vessels. This blood vessels from the bronchial artery, and it is oxygenated blood. Many branching till reaching the gas exchange area, and the gas exchange area receive venous and arterial blood. Arterial blood, it is of deoxygenated blood from the pulmonary artery, four pulmonary artery, and then return to the right side of the heart by the pulmonary vein. Process of the inspiration. The process of inspiration is involuntary, but the important point we should it is involuntary, but it is skeletal muscle, not like the heart, not like the heart also involuntary, but it's have smooth muscle. GIT is also involuntary, but is also smooth muscle, while the respiratory system it's have skeletal muscle but is involuntary. Also it may have voluntary control, but the voluntary control for short period or for short control only, small control, while the main respiration is involuntary, and the inspiration is by contraction, and the main muscle of contraction for inspiration is the diaphragm and the external intercostal. There is internal intercostal and external intercostal. The muscle which is important in the phase of the inspiration, it is the external intercostal muscle. By the contraction of this muscle, the diaphragm will increase, the flattening of the diaphragm will increase superior and inferior dimension, while the contraction of the external intercostal muscle increase the anterior posterior dimension. This will increase, and as we say, there is the pleural fluid that pull the outer surface of the lung with the thoracic cage. This will increase the surface area of the lung, so will cause negative pressure inside the lung. This negative pressure inside the lung will promote inspiration, as we'll see in this picture. In case of the inspiration, this is the ribs, and in between the rib, external intercostal muscle when contract will elevate the rib, elevate the sternum. This will increase the anterior posterior dimension, while the diaphragm will flatten, and this will pull the lung or the thoracic cage downward, so increase the area in the lung, so will create negative pressure that push the air inside. And opposite will occur in case of the expiration, and the expiration is mainly passive, no need of contraction, only relaxation of what contracted muscle in the inspiration. So in inspiration there is contraction, while in the expiration there is relaxation. This is called passive inspiration. Sometimes we need use accessory muscle. in case of stress, in case of exercise, in other case sometimes when the disease state, we need forced breathing or active breathing. In the active breathing, we use accessory muscle other than muscle mentioned, which is the external intercostal and the diaphragm. This is called accessory muscle of the respiration. And using of the accessory muscle of the respiration, sometimes meaning of the abnormal breathing or in case of the disease. So in the active phase of the inspiration, we use other muscle. This muscle either sternocleidomastoid, scalene, pectoralis minor. This is the accessory, while the main muscle of the inspiration, external intercostal muscle and diaphragm. In case of the expiration, also this muscle will relax. In addition, other muscle can help in the active expiration, which is the anterior abdominal muscle, also internal intercostal muscle and the innermost intercostal muscle. This is in case of the active breathing. Next slide about regulation of the respiration. As we say, the respiration is involuntary, and as it is involuntary, need some control. The main control center for the regulation of the respiration is the chemoreceptor. Many chemoreceptors in the body. In this lecture of Dr. Haider about the test, other lecture of many different parts of the chemoreceptor. The chemoreceptor we'll discuss here is the chemoreceptor for the oxygen saturation or CO2 saturation, and it is of two parts. Peripheral chemoreceptor. The peripheral chemoreceptor present in the two type. It is of two in number, present in the aorta and in carotid artery. The peripheral chemoreceptor, it have a small action, but this small action it is direct and mostly depend on the pressure of the oxygen within the blood vessels, partial pressure of the oxygen, and also on partial pressure of the CO2, and also on the pH. When this receptor detect decrease in the PO2, so will sends signal or sends impulse to higher center that this will increase the respiration and directing, and also other function of this chemoreceptor, it's increase the blood supply toward the kidney. This is for in case of the we'll say in case of the hypoxia, like in the next lecture we can see in the case of the hypoxia, chronic state of the hypoxia, there is secretion of the erythropoietin from the kidney. And also in case of the pH abnormality, this can be regulated by the kidney and also respiratory system, discussed in the next lecture. And also increasing the cardiac output for increasing the blood supply of the lung and increasing the ventilation. While the central chemoreceptor occur in the medulla oblongata of the brainstem. This receptor more sensitive and also is depend on the PCO2. Truly, it is not depend on the PCO2 because it is within the brain. It is depend on the pH of the CSF, of the cerebrospinal fluid. This will detect the change in any change in the oxygen or CO2 concentration within the CSF and send impulse that regulate the breathing with increase or decrease the breathing. Also, there is neural control of the ventilation. In the neural control of the ventilation, muscle of the inspiration, which is mainly two, which is the diaphragm and external intercostal muscle, or skeletal muscle, as we say. So this is need continuous impulse from the higher center to control its breathing. A main control center present in the medulla oblongata, and this neural control is rhythmic, continuous, with positive and negative impulse to cause inspiration with contraction of the muscle, and then negative impulse to cause relaxation of the muscle and cause expiration. And the rate of this ventilation is controlled by the negative feedback mechanism depending on the PCO2. Also, sometimes there is voluntary control of the respiration. This voluntary control of respiration may be used when holding the ventilation in breathing, also in talking, in other part of the other activity. We can voluntary control of the breathing, but to some small extent. After discussing the respiration and the air enter the lung, we will discuss gas exchange. The air will enter the trachea, bronchi, till reaching to the gas exchange area. Now, how gas exchange will occur? And the oxygen in the air will pass to the blood, and in opposite, CO2 from the blood pass to the air and to the external. This process is mainly dependent on the gradient, on the chemical gradient, on the concentration. It is passively no need energy from the high concentration to low concentration, from high pressure to low pressure. So it's important to know, which is mentioned in the lecture, some physics of the diffusion of the gases through the gases and diffusion of the gases through the liquid, which is important to understand the physiology of the gas exchange. It's important to know the area that the gas exchange occurs through it, which is called, this is the area consisting of multiple layers, and it is called diffusion barrier. And through this area the gas can exchange, and this area, it is consisting of one layer of the epithelial cell of the alveoli, basement membrane, then there is interstitial fluid in between the alveolus and the blood vessels, then the basement membrane of the blood vessels, and then endothelial cell, also single layer of the endothelial cell, then there is the plasma within the blood vessels, and then the blood cell and contain the hemoglobin. So this is the diffusion barrier, and through it gas exchange occur. We now discuss the gas exchange of the gas, firstly in the lung, and then how these gases will transported to other part of the tissue. We start with the oxygen, and as we say, the gas exchange depend on the pressure or the concentration. The concentration of the oxygen is high outside. This will push the oxygen inside the trachea, bronchi, this is the conductive part of the, till reaching the gas exchange area. In this area gas exchange will occur, so will decreasing from this concentration, which is about high concentration, will decreasing in the alveoli. Then also the alveoli is also more concentrated on more high pressure than in the blood vessels. This will cause to pushing the oxygen toward the blood. In opposite, the CO2, it's also in the deoxygenated blood. There is high concentration of the PCO2, or increased pressure of the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide. This will push the carbon dioxide to the alveoli, and from the alveoli also from high pressure than external, because it is very low pressure outside the lung, so this will push the CO2 outside the lung. This is the mechanism how the gases will passes from the atmospheric air to the reaching to the blood. Now the gases in the blood, how will that transport? How will reaching to the other part of the tissue? And we will discuss one first. Start with the oxygen, then with the carbon dioxide. Oxygen transport in the blood is very important to discuss with each point separately to understand many important points in this concept. As we say, oxygen is highly concentrated in the lung, and this concentration will push the oxygen to the blood vessels. In the blood vessels, in the blood, oxygen will bind with the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the carrier of the oxygen to the other part of the tissue. This binding or the affinity of the hemoglobin to collect or to binding with the hemoglobin is different in the lung from that in the tissue. There is high affinity of the hemoglobin to bind with the oxygen in the lung, and this affinity decreases when reaching to the tissue. Many different factors affect this affinity of the hemoglobin to contact with the oxygen. Why we should understand this point? Because when hemoglobin contact or bring the oxygen molecules, oxygen substance, oxygen from the lung to the other tissue, the distribution of the oxygen to the tissue is not hazardly or not randomly. Hemoglobin will provide oxygen according each area according to its need. Why? Area in the periphery or area active with the high oxygen need, so high energy need. This area will need high energy and produce more CO2, so in this area the hemoglobin will give more oxygen than area with low oxygen need. This factor can be discussed in this paragraph, which is called oxygen dissociation curve. The normal graph in the blue color, as the PO2 increase, the oxygen saturation in the hemoglobin will increase. This is occur in the lung till reaching the plateau where the hemoglobin reach the maximum concentration that cannot bind with other part or the other particle of the oxygen. Hemoglobin consisting of 4 parts, is tetramer of particle, 4 heme, and each heme part will can carry 1 oxygen part. So the saturation of the hemoglobin with the oxygen increase with increasing the partial pressure of the oxygen. But this curve will shift to the right, this red color. What's mean by shift to the right? Shift to the right mean in saturation of the oxygen in hemoglobin will decrease. This will give more oxygen. This will give oxygen to the tissue for breathing of the tissue. This right shift, it occur with decreased pH, with increased temperature, and with increase of this substance, which is important substance, which is either called DBG or BBG. Why increase shifting of the right shift of this curve to the right with decreasing pH? Because active tissue with more energy consuming, with more production of the CO2, will more produce acid, and this will cause decrease pH. So this decreasing in pH with increasing acidity, so the hemoglobin will give more oxygen to this area. Also, active tissue will produce more temperature, and this temperature in the active tissue can promote or can give signal to the hemoglobin to give more oxygen. And also, with the presence of this substance, oxygen can deliver more الهيموجلوبين can deliver more oxygen in this area, which is secrete diphosphoglycerate. When the curve shifting to the left, this is the green color, this is the normal, or this is the baseline, and this is the green, this is shifted to the left. What factor can shift the curve to the left? Shifting of the curve to the left mean decrease affinity to the increasing affinity to oxygen, more combined with oxygen, and cannot give the oxygen simply. This is occur mostly in the lung, and when the kidney the hemoglobin attach more and more to the oxygen, and this with increasing pH, decreasing temperature, and decreasing of diphosphoglycerate. So the factor important to know, the factor that shift the oxygen dissociation curve to the right, and also that shifting in opposite to the left. This is important for transporting of the oxygen to different part of the tissue. This is important in that the oxygen will reach distant area in the body, in the periphery, with also contained oxygen, and the oxygen not supply the near area in the heart, and then the other area can not reach oxygen. So the oxygen dissociation curve is very important, and the factor that control its affinity, it's very important. Two effects it's also important to understand. The first is the Bohr effect. Bohr effect is the, as in the say in the first in the previous slide, is the effect of the pH on the dissociation curve, with increasing acidity causing low pH, in decreasing the affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen, so more oxygen will be given to this tissue. This is called Bohr effect. Other factor it's also important and should discuss and understand after this is the Bohr effect, with discussing of transport of the carbon dioxide. In the opposite side, transporting of the oxygen from the lung to the tissue, carbon dioxide will transport it from the tissue to the lung for expiration. There are three type or by three way the carbon dioxide transported in the blood, either in the form of the carb amino compound, or in the form of the HCO3 ion, or sometimes or for a small amount dissolved in the plasma. And in this picture we can see this is the CO2 from the tissue passes the interstitial fluid and the blood vessels wall reaching to the entering the blood vessels and to the hemoglobin. In the hemoglobin either compound either in the form of the HCO3 ion, and this HCO3 ion will pass from the blood vessels to the plasma. Why pass from blood vessels to the plasma? This is for buffering system to decreasing the acidity of the blood. Sometimes the CO2 can be dissolved directly in the blood vessels, but this is for the small amount, or it is as in this compound with the hemoglobin called deoxyribonucleic hemoglobin or carbaminohemoglobin. This is the three way the CO2 can transported from the tissue, or method of transport from the tissue to the lung. Haldane effect is the effect of the CO2 on the affinity of the oxygen dissociation curve. With increasing of the BCO2, more oxygen can deliver from the hemoglobin to the tissue. This is called Haldane effect, and is also important for the transporting of the oxygen to the tissue. And the carbon dioxide BCO2 is very important in controlling the breathing, because the peripheral receptor and chemoreceptor and central chemoreceptor is mainly depending on the partial pressure of the CO2 for the controlling of the breathing. Thank you for your listening.